In 2022, Alabama has created some new child support guidelines. We've got a lot of new changes to both the child support guidelines and the comments, and in this video, I'm going to go over those with you. Um, Here's a copy of the old CS42 form and the new CS42 form. You can see there's all sorts of new lines in the newest one, particularly regarding daycare and this new concept called the self-support reserve. And we'll go over that in detail in this video and let you know what you need to know to be ready for these new child support guidelines. My name is Sam Bone. I'm a Gadsden, Alabama lawyer, and I help people going through difficult family law issues. Particularly in this instance, I help people when they're to make sure their child support is done correctly. So with this new law, the law will be effective beginning May 1st, 2022. It's only for cases filed after May 1st, 2022. So anything filed before that will still be under the old guidelines, the ones that we are currently doing. I'm recording this video in January of 2022. In the new child support guidelines, in some of the comments, they add some new comments about what assumptions they're taking when creating these guidelines. And the first thing is that they take into account gross income instead of net income. So a lot of times when I'm going over with a client, ask them what their income is, they'll say, well, I bring home $400 a week. The guidelines are created based upon what your gross income is. These guidelines were not created knowing what your net income is. So if you were to use your net income, then these guideline tables would not even be applicable because they weren't created for that. Next, they updated to September 2021 price levels. So I guess with inflation, they've taken into account that when they last did the guidelines, that goods and services to help take care of a child were lower than they are now. They also assume that all income is taxed at the rate of a single taxpayer based on federal and state income tax withholding formulas. And this one was pretty neat that I saw, where it assumes unreimbursed medical costs up to $250 per year. And this is really particularly useful for when people are on All Kids or Medicaid, because those folks have low or $0 deductibles. So a lot of times in an order, we'll have an order that says that each party is responsible for medicals for half of all uncovered medicals. And what this is pointing out is that the guidelines is going to assume that each year that custodial party is going to pay about $250 per year on uncovered medical expenses. And so it gives the non-custodial party an argument that if they get, in a full year, they get $200 worth of requests from the custodial parent asking for their half, they've got an argument to the judge to say, hey, look, judge, the guidelines have already taken into account that custodial party is going to pay that. So I thought that was pretty neat. And next is an assumption that the non-custodial party will exercise customary visitation, including summer visitation, which all the time we'll have a client that'll say, hey, look, I'm getting week on, week off during the summer, or even, hey, look, I'm getting a full month during the summer. And they'll say, I want my child support reduced based upon that. And we'll even see sometimes where they'll say, well, if I have the child for the whole summer, it's ridiculous that I'm paying child support. And what this guidelines points out is, look, we've already taken into account that the non-custodial parent is going to get more visitation than normal in the summer. Another neat thing here is that the top of the guidelines is increased. Used to, if someone makes 20,000 or both parties combined, it goes up to 20,000 per month was the max of the guidelines. Now you can go all the way up to someone where I guess really it takes into account both parties making all the way up to $30,000 per month. Um, um, and it points out that if you exceed the guidelines, at that point, it's not just guidelines, but the judge has discretion in based upon the child's expenses to go further beyond the guidelines as well. Extreme poverty is they finally they've addressed when people are actually making low amounts of money. It says because the revised schedule addresses combined monthly gross incomes down to $0, which now it does. Used to, you'll look here at what I have here, the old um, guidelines schedule in blue blocks out that you can't go all the way down to $0. Look, it goes for one child, it begins at $11.50 combined income. Whereas you look at the new one, and it actually takes into account from 0 to 250, 300, 350. And so it's going to be based upon folks' actual income rather than automatically using the minimum of that 253 that you've got. Again, you'll see with the new guidelines, for instance, if there's one child and the combined gross income between the two parties is $600, then 123 is the recommended amount for child support. Again, you would have to do some more formulas to that. That's just a start number. But if you go to the old guidelines, if it's 600, then automatically it goes up to 253. So there's a big difference there for people who are in extreme poverty. Childcare changes. With the new guidelines, there's an adjustment for who's paying the childcare costs. Previously, if you looked at the old CS42 form, it would add up the childcare, but you don't get to deduct it at the bottom. Whereas now, if you pay for the childcare, then you get to deduct it at the bottom, which we already had that with healthcare expenses. So if you're already paying for the health insurance, you got to subtract that at the bottom. But now you get to do that here. So now childcare costs are deducted at the end, just like health insurance. Used to be parties would be responsible for a percentage of the childcare costs, but would not be able to deduct them out at the end. Now they both pay a percentage. But if you're the one paying it, then you get to deduct the full amount. And here I've got a picture of it where you can see the total cost paid by each parent on the new one is actually deducted on the bottom, which at the on the old one, you get to add the work-related childcare costs, which we have that here, the new one as well, but you don't get to deduct it at the bottom. You can see on the old one, there's an adjustment for payment of healthcare coverage, but there's not an adjustment like there is now for payment of the work-related childcare costs. So the biggest change of all in the guidelines is the SSR, which is the self-support reserve calculation. So previously, the SSR, the self-support reserve, was taken into account in the chart where it adds up all the amounts or what the recommended guideline amount would be, which now they've taken that out, and instead you have to compare the child support amount to the SSR, which is 981, and compare the two. Here's the actual wording on the comments and I'll let you read through that at yourself. But I've gone over that. So for instance, here's some examples of child support numbers. In the new one, it would be $796 for one kid, and the old one, with the same amount of money, the old one it's $769. And so this takes into account where previously it took into account SSR, now it doesn't. So Rule 32.5C explains how to perform the SSR calculation and it also addresses the 85% economic incentive. To apply the economic incentive, the amount of income available for support after adjusting for the SSR will be multiplied by a factor of 0.85. And you can see that that's actually in the child support chart. And the reason they use 0.85, they explain, is that they're taking into account that there's going to be payroll taxes on gross income of around 13% is what they say, so they round it up to 15%, and allows the payor to keep a small portion of those earnings. All right, here's a new thing here is what's called a $0 order. This creates a rebuttable presumption that an order requiring no child support from the paying party should be entered. So they're actually laying out it should be in limited situations. It says that there's a rebuttable presumption that there should be a $0 order when they have no gross income and they receive only means-tested assistance. So the only assistance they're getting is means-tested from the government, and they have no gross income, then they're saying that there should be a $0 child support order. And that's brand new. That's big. It gives courts discretion that if they find they're voluntarily unemployed or underemployed, that they can still impute them some money. So realistically, when we have someone that's living strictly off the government with no job, it'll be our job to argue that there should be a $0 order. And this page here goes over the difference in the old guidelines versus the new ones, where we point out here the self-support reserve, and where you take that number, your previous number, minus 981, and then multiply times 0.85, compare the two, and then write out what the recommended child support order should be. So those are the new guidelines. Again, my name is Sam Bone, and I handle family law cases here in Etowah County. And if you have any questions, please let me know, and click the button below to get a copy of the slides here. And if you want to set up an appointment, click the button for us to get started, for us to make sure that your child support is done correctly. Think about it. If your child support is not done correctly, then you're losing money. So it makes sense to keep your money in your pocket by making sure your child support is done correctly.